the ambulance service is actually monitoring that camera or not. The empirical fact is that the presence of that optical surveillance on the street makes it a less safe environment than the organic ability of the street to manage its own affairs. This is a very, very different way of looking at things than the top-down model that comes along with Corbusier. And I want you to bear these two models of things in mind, because so far we've only really applied them to fairly conventional urban contexts. We're about to talk about some examples of the smart city. And I want you, as we discuss those examples, to think which one of these approaches the smart city as we're offered it resonates with more. Okay? These are some contemporary visions of the smart city. The one that you've most probably heard about, the most famous smart city that I'm aware of, is New Songdo. This is a city that's being built on landfill, about 45 minutes to the southwest of Seoul, the capital city of South Korea. Just south of the airport. It is an immigration. It's a tax-free zone. It's an incentive zone, an enterprise incentive zone. And the idea of Songdo, as expressed by its developers, and interestingly enough, not the government, not the parties that we generally think of as being responsible for the creation of places, but a private property developer. The idea of New Songdo was that it would have network digital information technology literally wired into the very fabric of the city itself, and into everything that the city was and did. So, literally, you know, the garbage cans would have RFID tags, or RFID sensors built into them, and every can of beer or soda that was sold in Songdo would have an RFID tag on it, so that when you throw your soda can into the recycling bin, the bin would register that presence and you know, send 5 cents back to your account as a way of thanking you for being a good citizen and recycling properly. As a matter of fact, there's a whole armature of services that were predicated on the existence of this digital network sensor environment in Songdo, built into everything. What you see here are examples like the magic mirror, which was a mirror in your house that when you were brushing your teeth in the morning would give you the read on the weather and the stock prices and the latest news. All of the building entry systems would be biometric, so that they would have iris scanning cameras mounted above them, and you know, they would scan your body for your unique biometric signatures and only afford access to those people who are authenticated as being on the access control list. There would be automated delivery trucks, robot delivery trucks, roaming the streets of Songdo, bringing packages from the store. There would be things like dynamic pricing markets for parking that was all mediated through the network. All telephones would be IP telephony. Every aspect of home life, every aspect of the interface between the home and the building, every aspect of the interface between the building and the city infrastructure, and everything that was in public space would be determined and driven by this network logic. All of it managed, you'll notice here, by a Microsoft Windows system. If you know anything about technology, you can imagine what everyday life in a city with the quality, the interaction quality of Microsoft Windows would be like. I would sooner slit my wrists than live in a place like that. But this was taken seriously. You know, this is what they really tried to do in Songdo, with a very, very limited degree of success. But it's interesting that real people and real businesses with real market imperatives facing real pressures thought that this would be an interesting and a successful way of going about doing things. This was the smart city. Another model of the smart city that we're offered is that is promoted to us by the IBM Corporation of the United States. This is the Networked Operations Center that IBM built for the city of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. Again, almost entirely about capturing data from the street, capturing imagery, a stream of imagery from the street, analyzing that imagery, analyzing that data, and using it to make predictive models of reality for the utility and convenience not of the people who live in Rio, but of the managers of the city. As a matter of fact, very much not for the convenience of the people who live there, because most of the people who live in the neighborhoods that are under surveillance by this networked operations center are favelas, they're slums. And if there's anything that the city of Rio does not want to present to the world in the run-up to the Olympics, it is a city of slums. So there is ongoing, right now, what is being called, very politely, a pacification campaign, which is really a slum clearance campaign, which is really, you know, what it really implies is that police and armored vehicles are going into the slums and kicking the people who live there out by any means necessary, including the violent application of force. That is what this image sanitizes. This is a use of networked data collection, analysis, and decision-making support that has an agenda that's very closely coupled to it. But that agenda is never discussed anywhere in the promotional materials. This image is offered to us as progress, as the future, as a way of making our cities safer and cleaner. It may certainly make our cities more efficient, but as my colleague and friend Ben Hammersley pointed out yesterday, we need to ask ourselves which qualities and quantities are being optimized for. What is this deployment of smart city technology being used to achieve? There are other and happier versions of this promoted by IBM. This is a rather resort-like little town in Greece that is being designed by IBM to incorporate all of their technology from the ground up. It's their version of the smart city. Cisco, another large technology vendor, very big player in smart city systems. One of Cisco's, Cisco is more often associated with the infrastructure that the network is built on, literally the machines, the routers that make the internet. So Cisco has always wanted to get up to where the value is in the value chain, to get up to kind of consumer solutions. And something that they've been relatively successful at is telepresence, is these giant interactive screens that cut a hole in space and time and manage to allow somebody in Taipei to speak to somebody in San Diego effortlessly, as though literally a hole was cut in the space between them. Telepresence is not something that I think Cisco will ever get right. It's much more likely to me that a company like Apple will get it right. Nevertheless, this is a perceived area of excellence of theirs. It's part of their value proposition. So when Cisco discusses the smart city, and you go to their website, you look for their promotional materials about smart cities, this is what you see. Telepresence is at the core of their value proposition. What they don't tell you in public, but what they're happy to tell you in private, is that they partner with institutions like the Dubai Police. And I've had it heard, I was on a stage once with an individual who was the head of Cisco's European Smart Cities Initiative, and who said in so many words that our vision of the smart city is partnering with the Dubai Police to put an IP camera over every building entrance in Dubai so we can track every movement, every person coming or going in the city, and we can help them manage the city. Manage the city. I don't know if you know a lot about Dubai, but it is an economy that is based on something I feel entirely comfortable describing to you as slave labor. The people who physically built that city are Indian and Pakistani and Bangladeshi and Filipino laborers who arrive on contracts and immediately have their passports confiscated from them, and who live in labor camps that are out in the desert, and whose movements are tightly policed and controlled. So when the Dubai Police talks about they want to see who's coming and going, and who's allowed to be there and who's not allowed to be there, that's not a neutral thing at all. It is very much something about maintaining a system of social order that I personally feel comfortable describing as oppression. You may have different feelings, you may have different politics, and that's entirely valid. You have every bit as much as right to your politics as I have to my politics, but I'm not comfortable with this, and I would not want to live in a city where this kind of arrangement was enforced. As a matter of fact, I personally wouldn't build this kind of system for a client, no matter how much they paid me. This is Cisco's take on the smart city. The gigantic German conglomerate Siemens is another big smart city player. This is the best image I was able to find on their site about their smart city offering. It's kind of like a Microsoft Word clip art or something, or PowerPoint clip art. This is the most elaborate evidence that they're able to offer as to what they think that they would be doing in the smart city space. Here's another image on the Siemens site. Apparently, they hired a summer intern to do a bad texture wrapping onto a model of a car from Tron and Photoshop that onto a carpet sample. And this is their. Frankly, I have no idea what this means. I have no idea what this implies for the smart city. But when you go to Siemens' site, you say, I'm looking for some images about what your proposition is, what you propose to deploy and develop in smart cities. This is what you get. And we'll come back to Siemens again later because they're the most techno-determinist techno-optimistic, techno-utopian of all of these propositions, and they're all pretty techno-utopian to begin with. There's a smaller company that's very interesting to me that works in the smart city place. This is a company called Living Planet, and they've devised a city in Portugal that they call Planet Valley. So it's, you know, Plan IT. The name of the city incorporates the name of their company. So again, not land use as determined by most of the processes, you know, that we ordinarily associate with land use politics and determination. Not land use that comes from a community, but literally the private development of a city. And of all of them, you know, Planet Valley is probably the one that has the most elaborately worked out depiction of what everyday life would be like in this place. All of these other visions kind of wave a hand at this sort of decisive instrumentation of the environment. But Living Planet actually develops that vision to a fair degree of detail. And in all fairness, this does not look like a hideous place to work. I don't know if the screen is bright enough for you to see it, but you know, it's got a knockoff Jacobson chair in it. It's got, you know, this kind of Wallpaper Magazine 1999 look to it. It looks designy, right? It doesn't look horrendous to me. Here, they're basically abstracting and waving a magic wand at everything that's difficult about social interaction in this space. They're saying, well, we're going to have smart sensors under the floors, and we're going to have smart wall telemetry, and the environment is going to continually be gathering information from its users to optimize itself for the people moving in and working in that space. And there's never any detail gone into as to what value is being generated by these things, or indeed how that space is going to generate value for its users. But it is, in all fairness, the most elaborate of these visions. Let's look really carefully at some definitions, because here I'm going to bring my cultural studies lens to bear. My only degree, I don't have a degree in architecture or anything, actually. My undergraduate degree is my only degree, and it was in cultural studies. So I know how to do close readings. So I figured that I would do a close reading of all the promotional material on the websites of each of these institutions, each of these organizations, and see what they think the smart city is. IBM's is this, and you'll forgive me for reading the slides. I know you can read a slide too, but I just kind of want to emphasize what they say. IBM describes the smart city as technology that synchronizes and analyzes efforts among sectors and agencies as they happen, not individuals, sectors and agencies, giving decision makers consolidated information that helps them anticipate problems and manage growth and development in a sustainable way that minimizes disruptions, and helps increase prosperity for everyone. Well, I like that, prosperity for everyone. We should all be prosperous. That's a neat vision. But the rest of it is just a minefield of issues, including things like anticipate problems. Well, what problems? You know, what problems are we talking about? What do we consider a problem? Do we consider it a problem that there are poor people visible on the street? I don't personally find that particularly problematic, but you know, maybe that's something that the city government of Rio thinks is a problem. Again, decision makers. All of this information that's being gathered and that we're doing predictive analytics on, and that we're developing these amazing visualizations and intelligence reports from, that's not for you. That's for the decision makers. It's for the sectors and the agencies. It's not for you or me. Minimizes disruptions. That's good. This is Cisco's description. It's a little bit easier for you to take. It's pretty matter of fact. There's one problem with it, which we'll get to, but the seamless integration of public and private services delivered across a common network infrastructure to individuals, governments, and businesses. Well, that's a pretty clean definition. I have no problem with that. It's got the public and the private in about the right order. It's got the common network infrastructure. If they'd only said open common network infrastructure, I think we'd be in complete agreement. And they have individuals, governments, and businesses, again, in the right order of priority. Individuals, governments, you know, representing all of us, and private interests at the bottom. So that's great. That's actually a pretty good description. They blow it with this word seamless. In the history of interaction design, it is a continual temptation to describe things as seamless. Any kind of transition or moment of juncture or hinge between heterogeneous systems we are taught that we need to make that as smooth as possible and to describe that as seamless. I don't believe in this rhetoric of seamlessness at all. I think it's dishonest. I think it's impossible. I mean, beyond the fact that it's dishonest, I think it's impossible. I think that we have an obligation as designers, rather, to design beautiful seams. And this is an argument that goes back to Mark Weiser. This is an argument that in the history of ubiquitous computing goes back to the very beginning. We have never believed in seamlessness, but people keep trying to sell it. But for that word seamless, though, Cisco's definition of the smart city I can live with. This is Siemens. This is the one that really kind of, wow. Several decades from now, remember that. Not now, not any time in my lifetime probably, but if we're talking about several decades from now, I mean 50 years, right? I'm 43 years old. I'm going to be 93 by the time the smart city rolls around. Several decades from now, cities will have countless autonomous, intelligently functioning IT systems that will have perfect knowledge of users' habits and energy consumption and provide optimum service. The goal of such a city, is to optimally regulate and control resources by means of autonomous IT systems. Well, whoa, there are more problems in that sentence than we probably have time to discuss, but let's look at some of them. The first is right at the very beginning, in almost the most casual part of that sentence, that truth claim. The goal of such a city. I don't know about you, but I've never thought of cities as having goals. And what is the goal of Aarhus? What is the goal of Copenhagen? What is the goal of Seoul? Or the goal of San Francisco? Cities don't have goals. Or if they do, they're emergent. They're things that arise out of the collective decisions of the people who live there. A city does not have an imposed victory condition, desired end state. That is a fundamental and profound misunderstanding of what a city is, does, and is for. All of this sort of fan service that's played to autonomous systems, autonomous intelligent systems, autonomous intelligently functioning systems ought to terrify us. Because as far as I'm concerned, there's no fully autonomous system that has ever been created. Every system has our politics inscribed into it. Every system operates for our convenience, and if it doesn't, then it's broken, right? So very, very strange thinking here about what autonomy means in this context. The perfect knowledge, though, is really the big intellectual black hole here. Because, again, in any system that's bound by the laws of physics, in anything, in other words, that happens in our universe and not some other fantasy universe, there's no such thing as perfect knowledge. There's always observer bias, there's always friction, there's always lossage, there's always lossy transcription. The whole notion of a system that builds its model of reality on a perfect representation is something that most of us left behind a long time ago as like adolescent wish fulfillment fantasy. And here's a giant German conglomerate telling us that this is how we're going to run and manage cities in the future. Not so happy with that. Let's look at Living Planet. This one's really interesting. A complete picture of building state usage and operations continually maintained, allowing constant optimization of energy, resources, environment, and occupant support and convenience systems. Pay attention to that language. That's just beautiful. That is like the new low in jargon. Everything that we think of as being the crux of urban value, everything that we think of as being the crux of urban experience, the texture of the streetscape, the disposition of the streets, the way the light falls upon them, the way it feels when the wind blows down the street in wintertime, the way it feels to suddenly recognize your partner walking 50 meters ahead of you from the way that their foot falls on the sidewalk. All of that, all of it, the sidewalk cafes, the rock festivals, anything, you name it, all of that is now occupant support and convenience systems. Like we're living on a space station. And again, that optimization, constant perfect optimization, constant perfect awareness, a complete picture. And then really interestingly, that thing about building state usage. Of all of these, Living Planet's vision is most about the building. The building itself is this kind of autonomous thing within the city, not the urban frame, the building, and how the building interacts with other buildings. But of all of these, Living Planet is probably the most honest because they also define on their website, they define the smart city as being the missing link between the real estate and technology sectors. And that's just the truth. I mean, ladies and gentlemen, we have a winner. That is the most honest description of the smart city that I've heard from any of these institutions yet. Let's look at the core competencies of these institutions and what they bring to the game. This is what IBM thinks is involved in delivering smart city products, services, and applications to the market. And there's a whole bunch of competencies in there. I don't understand exactly what some of these things mean. I don't think these words, some of them, mean what IBM thinks they mean. Nevertheless, that's a pretty long laundry list, and in and of itself, that's pretty consonant with my understanding and expectation of the complexity of a city. This is what Cisco thinks is necessary. It's a slightly different taxonomy. It literally at the top includes not merely telepresence, but telepresence, which is Cisco's branded telepresence solution suite. I'm pretty comfortable with all of this. I mean, again, there are some issues, but this is, if you understood all of these things really well, you'd be a long way down the road in terms of understanding what you need to do to manage a city. This is what Siemens thinks is at stake in the smart city. Low voltage, medium voltage, mobility, and building technologies. Wow. I mean, wow. Wow. This is what Living Planet thinks that their offering has something to do with. The urban operating system, trademark, the urban network appliance, the urban cloud appliance, urban transportation. They really must think this urban, is like magic pixie dust that you can sprinkle on something to make it sexier. The transportation, that's so boring in 20th century. We've got urban transportation. That's like so much more interesting. And urban sensor networks. So, like I said, I've worked in technology and information technology for like 14 years now, like a decade and a half. I don't know what the difference is between a network appliance and a cloud appliance. I don't know why an urban sensor network is necessarily any different from a generic sensor network. I don't understand the hell what half of this means. And nevertheless, these are the competencies that Living Planet thinks are required to build for us a smart city. Because this is, these visions, these four distinct, discrete, separate visions articulated by different institutions at different times have an astonishing degree of overlap. And the degree of overlap, the commonality between them, I think we're safe in saying, we're fair in defining as the smart cities we're being offered. And I think as you can tell from my tone of voice and my skepticism that there are problems with all these visions and with the body of common belief and truth claims that they make. The first is that most all of them live in what's called the proximate future. Genevieve Bell and Paul Durish write a lot about the proximate future. The proximate future is the future that's just beyond the reach of our fingertips. It's like always just around the corner. And what's great about the proximate future from the perspective of one of these institutions is that it's kind of unfalsifiable. It's a very, very flexible time period. It's a very, very flexible domain of time. So if you are building something for the city of New York and they want a guarantee that this is something that will happen within the next budget cycle, the proximate future is, oh yeah, these projections are 18 months, 2 years, right? That's that proximate future. But if somebody's coming at you critically and saying, well, all of these things that you're proposing fall really far short of the claims that you're making for them, then you can say, well, really we're talking about the mid-21st century, maybe even, 2075 before these systems come online. So the proximate future is elastic. It has a way of stretching and expanding or contracting to accommodate the needs of the moment. But one thing it never is a specified date with a specified target and a specified verifiable claim made in association with it. It's completely unfalsifiable. You can say anything you want. You can say, a couple years from now, we'll have robot cars. Yeah, okay, sure. Approximate future. So that's the dimension of time that these things operate in. The dimension of space that they operate in is also really interesting. It's what Deleuze called the any space whatever. It's this abstract, unconditioned space of degree zero. It's a space without texture, a space without history. And all of these things, you'll notice, are built on physical terrain that's about as close to this abstract space as is possible. Literally built on landfill. Literally built on an abandoned site out in the middle of a desert. Literally built, you know, in a mountain valley in Portugal where nobody ever thought to build a settlement. And the thing about the any space whatever is that, again, it kind of absolves you of responsibility. It absolves you of responsibility to account for a place and its lifeways, a place and its culture, a place even and anything that's grown up around it at all. You can start from scratch. You can start from a clean sheet of paper. And anybody who knows anything about the long, long history of human attempts to start over from zero, that should scare you shitless. Because any such thing, by definition, is a utopia. And utopian experiments always end in tears. I think it's fair for us to ask which of these modes is more adaptable to existing municipal procurement practices as well. And I can tell you from personal experience that it's in the nature of institutions that they're not particularly geared to the bottom-up way of doing things. They're not particularly geared to the multiple, the diverse, or the discrete. They're geared by their very scale, nature, and velocity to the institutions that are like IBM, that are like Cisco, and that are like Siemens. It's almost as if the surface proteins of the city allow it only to plug into other organizations and institutions of similar size and scale, which results in a certain commonality of the visions of the smart city that were offered. But, you know, as far as I'm concerned, the real problem with the smart city isn't any of those.